Salford, 1951, 6:15 in the morning, and the fog hadn't lifted off the canal yet. Alfred Whitmore stood at the corner of Liverpool Street, cap already on, boots already blacked the night before. He didn't rush, he never rushed the morning. He straightened his jacket once, checked the crease in his trousers with a flat hand, and only then stepped off the curb. A lad ran past him, late for the same shift, shirt untucked, laces undone. Alfred watched him go and said nothing. He didn't need to say anything. In Salford, in 1951, a man's morning told you everything about the kind of man he was before he'd said a single word. Alfred wasn't rich. He'd never been rich a day in his life. His father had died in a factory accident with 4 shillings in his pocket. But Alfred Whitmore walked into that mill every morning, looking like a man who owed nobody an explanation for who he was. Because that was the thing nobody tells you about that generation of British men. The polish on the boots wasn't vanity, it was a message. And the message was simple. Asterisk, you may have taken my wages, but you will never take my standard. Asterisk, Alfred Whitmore wasn't unusual. He wasn't the exception on that street, or in that mill, or in that city. He was the rule. Walk the shipyards of Govan in the same year and you'd find 1,000 men just like him. Sleeves rolled to the exact same fold, caps set at the exact same angle, as if some invisible sergeant had drilled the whole Clyde into formation. Walk the coal villages of the South Wales valleys and you'd find the same thing in the chapel pews on Sunday, men who'd spent 6 days, black to the eyebrows with coal dust, and one day looking like they'd stepped out of a tailor's window. Walk the docks of Cardiff, the steelworks of Sheffield, the railway sheds of Newcastle, and the pattern repeated itself with the precision of a hymn everyone somehow knew the words to. This wasn't fashion. Fashion changes with the season. This was something else. Entirely a code, unwritten, unspoken, passed from father to son in the time it takes to tie a tie or spit polish a boot. Here is the thesis, and it's worth writing down. Asterisk, asterisk, for the British working man of that era. Dignity wasn't something you were given. It was something you built, brick by brick, every single morning, with your own 2 hands. Asterisk, asterisk, number 25 is the rule that decided whether a man was trusted with credit at the corner shop before he'd said a single word. Somewhere in the middle of this list, at number 13, there's a rule about silence that most men today would call weakness. It wasn't weakness, it was the opposite. And number one isn't really a rule at all. It's the rule that all the other 24 were quietly built on top of, and once you hear it, you'll understand why the whole code collapsed the moment Britain forgot it. The world changed. The pits closed, the yards went quiet, the mills fell silent one by one. And somewhere in that change, we lost the code. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button, because there are more lost codes coming. And men like Alfred Whitmore deserve to be remembered properly, one rule at a time. Now, let's count down the 25 lost gentleman codes. British working-class men swore by before 1965, starting from the top. Number 25. The boot that spoke before the man did. Asterisk, asterisk, a working man's boots were blacked the night before, never the morning of, because a rushed shine was worse than no shine at all. Cecil Hargreaves, Leeds, 1948, sat by the fire every night with newspaper spread on his knee, brushing his boots until his wife told him to come to bed. You didn't walk into a shop, a church, or a foreman's office with dull boots. You checked them the way other men checked their pockets for coin. Down in the mining villages of Durham, a man's boots were often the only new thing he owned in a year. and so they were treated like the only new thing he owned. Not for show, for sale. Number 24. The cap came off before the door did. Asterisk, asterisk, a cap was removed the instant a man crossed a threshold, a church, a home, a shop, without exception, without thinking about it. Thomas Pemberton, Bristol, 1953, was seen once forgetting, hand already halfway to the latch, and correcting himself before anyone noticed. You didn't need reminding twice. In the chapel-going communities of Wales and the Northeast, this was drilled in before a boy turned 10. Not manners for manners' sake, a signal that you knew where you stood. Number 23. The collar was ironed even when the wage wasn't earned yet. Asterisk, asterisk. A clean collar on a Monday morning told the foreman a man's whole week before the man had lifted a single tool. Wilfred Cotton, Sheffield, 1950, pressed his one good collar every Sunday night on a borrowed flat iron, regardless of how thin his week had been. You didn't let a hard week show on your collar. Steel town foremen were known to remember the man with the crisp collar over the man with the loud excuse. Poverty was allowed. Sloppiness was not. Number 22. A handshake was given exactly once, and it meant everything. Asterisk, asterisk, a man's handshake wasn't a greeting, it was a signature, binding as any contract. Ernest Boswell, Newcastle, 1946, shook on a debt of £2 with a neighbour, and repaid it 18 months later to the exact penny, because a handshake outlived memory. You didn't shake twice on the same matter, because a second shake meant the first hadn't been. Trusted shipyard men on the Tyne settled disputes over timber and tools with nothing more than a gripped palm. No paper, no witness, just a grip, and a man's whole name behind it. Number 21. You stood for the anthem, and you stood for your elders, the same posture, the same silence. Asterisk, asterisk, standing wasn't reserved for national occasions. It was owed to any man 20 years your senior the moment he entered a room. Harold Fenwick, Birmingham, 1955, rose from his own fireside chair when his father-in-law walked in, without being asked, without thinking twice. You didn't remain seated in front of age. In the working men's clubs of the Midlands, a young man caught seated while an elder stood was quietly corrected, sometimes with nothing more than a look. Respect wasn't earned through conversation. It was demonstrated through posture. Number 20. A borrowed tool came back cleaner than it left. Asterisk, asterisk, whatever, you borrowed a spanner, a shovel, a ladder, returned in better condition than you'd received it, without being asked. Sydney Marsh, Cardiff Docks, 1949, once spent an evening oiling a neighbour's saw before returning it, though nobody had requested it. You didn't return a debt, you returned it improved. This habit ran through the terraced streets of every industrial city, because a man's tools were an extension of his name. And you didn't hand a name back worn down. Number 19. The Sunday suit was one suit, and it was treated like 10. Asterisk, asterisk, a working man typically owned a single suit for church, weddings, and funerals alike, brushed and hung the same careful way after every single wearing. Albert Dunmore, Govan, 1952, kept his one suit on a wooden hanger stuffed with newspaper to hold its shape between wears, a trick passed down from his own father. You didn't own many things. You owned few things, and you owned them properly. A single good suit, cared for across 20 years, said more about a man than a wardrobe full of shirts ever could. Number 18. You never discussed wages in front of another man's wife. Asterisk, asterisk, money. How much you earned, how little you'd been paid, was never spoken of in mixed company, under any circumstance. Bernard Cray Salford, 1954, changed the subject flatly the moment a neighbor's wife entered the room mid-conversation about overtime. You didn't let a woman carry the weight of a man's financial worry into her own kitchen. Mining villages in particular held this code fiercely. A wife's peace of mind was protected the same way. A man protected his own pride. Number 17. A man walked on the outside of the pavement, nearest the road, without exception. Asterisk, asterisk, whoever you walked beside, wife, mother, sister, neighbor, you positioned yourself between them and the traffic, automatically, without a word exchanged. Walter Pemberton, Leeds, 1951, was seen doing this, even walking his elderly aunt 50 yards to the corner shop. You didn't need a reason. It was instinct, trained into a boy before he understood why. It came from a simpler root than chivalry. It came from the idea that a man absorbed risk so someone else didn't have to. Number 16. You didn't complain about the job in front of the men doing it worse off than you. Asterisk, asterisk, a miner might grumble to another miner, but never in front of the surface laborer earning half his wage. Norman Ashcroft, a Rother Valley collier, 1947, was known for biting his tongue about a hard shift the moment a younger apprentice, paid a fraction of his rate, walked into earshot. You measured your complaints against a man standing next to you. In the pits and the yards, this was less a rule than a survival instinct, because morale, once broken, spread through a workforce faster than any strike notice. Number 15. The word please was used with strangers, and never with family, because family didn't need asking. Asterisk, asterisk, a working man was courteous with shopkeepers and foremen, but blunt and direct at his own table, because manners between blood was considered a kind of distance. Leonard Hobbs, Bristol, 1953, would tip his cap and thank a bus conductor by name, then sit down at home and simply say, "Pass the bread," without a flicker of rudeness, intended or received. You didn't confuse formality with love. One was for the outside world. The other was for the people who already had your loyalty. Number 14. The hat came off at exactly the right moment. Not a second early, not a second late. Asterisk, asterisk, a hat was tipped or removed at precisely the correct instant passing. Hearse, greeting a woman, entering a place of worship, and getting the timing wrong, was considered its own small failure. George Tunstall, Newcastle, 1950, was famous on his street for removing his cap the exact moment a funeral procession turned the corner. Never before, never after. You didn't perform the gesture. You understood the moment, and the gesture followed naturally. Timing, in that world, was its own kind of manners. Pause here for a moment, because somewhere between the pit closures of the 1960s and the last shipyard whistle on the Clyde in the 1970s, something in Britain went quiet that never came back. A study conducted by a Manchester social historian in the early 1980s, looking back at interviews recorded with retired dock and mill workers, found that nearly 70% of men over 60 described their father's generation as harder, but steadier, not richer, not happier, necessarily, steadier. The kind of steady that comes from a code, followed daily, without exception, regardless of mood or circumstance. What changed wasn't the men. It was the architecture around them. The pits closed. The yards fell silent, one by one, Govan, Jarrow, Cardiff's docklands, and with them went the daily proving ground, where a boy learned these rules simply by standing next to his father for 10 hours a shift. Television arrived in the front room and quietly replaced the working men's club, where these codes were enforced socially, gently. Generation 2. Generation, over a pint and a game of dominoes. Individualism crept in where community discipline used to sit. Nobody decided to lose the code. Nobody voted it away. It simply had nowhere left to be taught. And a whole generation of British men grew up without a father standing beside them at 6:15 in the morning, showing them silently, boots already blacked, what it actually looked like. Number 13. A man kept his troubles behind his teeth. Asterisk, personal hardship, illness, debt, grief, was carried privately, discussed with perhaps one trusted friend, and never worn on the face at work. Frank Aldous Sheffield, 1956, worked a full week at the steelworks, the same week he buried his infant son, and colleagues only learned of it a month later. This wasn't coldness. It was the belief that a man's pain was his own to carry, and burdening a workplace or a street with it helped nobody. Silence, in this code, wasn't suppression. It was a form of consideration for everyone around you. Number 12. You never let a debt outlive a handshake's memory. Asterisk, a borrowed sum, however small, was repaid before it needed reminding, often earlier than agreed, never later. Cyril Bracewell, Birmingham, 1958. Repaid a loan from his brother-in-law 2 weeks ahead of schedule, walking the extra distance across town on his one day off to do it in person. You didn't let money sit between two men longer than necessary. A debt unpaid too long wasn't just bad manners, it was a quiet insult to the man who'd trusted you. Number 11. The door was held, and you didn't wait to be thanked for it. Asterisk, holding a door was done automatically for anyone, and the gesture was considered complete the moment it was performed, thanks or no thanks. Edwin Talbot, Cardiff, 1952, held the factory gate for a full queue of men behind him every single morning, rain or shine, and never once looked back to see if anyone noticed. You didn't do it to be seen. You did it because that was simply what a man did. Number 10. A man's word, once given, could not be renegotiated. Asterisk, an agreement, verbal, informal, unwitnessed, was as binding as anything signed. Herbert Sowerby, Salford, 1949, agreed to sell a neighbor a bicycle for 12 shillings, and honored the price a week later even after discovering he could have sold it elsewhere for 15. You didn't go back on a price, a promise, or a favor once it had left your mouth. Your word was the only currency that mattered more than the coin in your pocket. Number 9. You dressed for the job you had, not the job you wished you had, and did it with pride either way. Asterisk, a laborer dressed as sharply within his means as a clerk dressed within his. The standard of care mattered more than the category of work. Arthur Grimshaw, Leeds Railway Sheds, 1954, kept his overalls patched and pressed with the same care a bank clerk gave a suit. You didn't apologize for your station through your appearance. You honored it. Number 8. A man never raised his voice. To be heard, he lowered it. Asterisk, genuine authority in these communities was expressed through a quieter voice, not a louder one. A raised voice was read as a loss of control. Douglas Wren, foreman at a Glasgow shipyard, 1957, was known to drop his voice to almost a whisper when a job was going badly wrong on the yard floor, and the whole crew would lean in to listen. You didn't shout to be obeyed. You spoke quietly, and let the quiet do the work. Number 7. You gave up your seat, and you gave it up before you were asked. Asterisk, on a packed tram or bus, a seat was offered to the elderly, to women, to the injured instantly, without hesitation, without performance. Percy Hollis, Bristol, 1951. Stood the entire 40-minute route home from a double shift so an elderly stranger could sit, and never mentioned it to a soul afterward. You didn't wait to be asked. Waiting to be asked defeated the entire point of the gesture. Number 6. A man fixed what was broken before he complained that it was broken, asterisk, asterisk, faced with a leaking tap, a loose fence post, or a broken chair. The instinct was to repair it quietly rather than announce the inconvenience. Ronald Spate, Newcastle, 1953, mended his elderly neighbor's guttering on a Sunday afternoon without being told it needed doing, simply because he'd noticed it sagging on his way past. You didn't wait for someone else to notice the problem. Noticing it yourself and solving it was the whole point of being a man in that street. Number 5. You never let a woman carry something heavier than you carried yourself. Asterisk, asterisk, regardless of what a man himself was hauling. A woman nearby was never left to carry the heaviest load unassisted. Victor Lum, Manchester, 1955, was seen unloading his own week's coal delivery and still crossing the street to help a neighbor's wife with her shopping bags before finishing his own task. This wasn't about weakness or strength. It was about where a man chose to place his effort first. Number 4. Handshake grip told you his health, his honesty, and his mood, so he made sure it told the truth. Asterisk, asterisk, the firmness, warmth, and steadiness of a handshake was treated as a genuine piece of information about a man's character, and was never allowed to be careless. Kenneth Openshaw, Sheffield, 1958, was taught by his father at age 9 to grip firmly, look up, and never let his hand go limp, because a weak handshake in that world was read as a weak man. You didn't offer your hand carelessly, you offered it the way you offered your name. Number 3. You stood when a woman entered the room, and you stood when she left it. Asterisk, asterisk, this courtesy applied at home, at the pub, at church, not selectively, not only for guests worth impressing. Alfred Whitmore, yes. The same man from the opening of this film, stood every single evening when his wife entered their small kitchen in Salford, 30 years into their marriage, long after any outsider was left to witness it. You didn't perform respect for an audience, you performed it because it was true whether anyone was watching or not. Number 2. A man's home, however small, was never allowed to look poor, only plain. Asterisk, asterisk, poverty of income was accepted as circumstance. Poverty of care was not accepted at all. A working man's front step was scrubbed, his brass letterbox polished, his windows cleaned, regardless of how little sat behind that door. Cecil Hargreaves, Leeds Terrace, 1948, had bare floorboards and a single armchair and a front step, so clean you could see your reflection in the stone. You didn't confuse having little with keeping little. One was circumstance, the other was character. Number 1. Discipline was practiced when nobody was watching, because that was the only version of it that counted. Asterisk, asterisk. Every rule on this list, every boot polished, every hat tipped, every debt repaid early, rested on this single foundation: a man behaved the same way alone as he did in public. There was no private version of Alfred Whitmore that cut corners. There was no version of Ernest Boswell who broke his word when nobody could prove it. The entire code, 24 rules deep, was really just one rule, worn 24 different ways. Asterisk, asterisk, you are who you are when no one is checking. Asterisk, asterisk, Salford, 1951, 6:15 in the morning. The fog still sitting on the canal. Alfred Whitmore steps off the curb, boots already blacked, cap already set, jacket already straight. Nobody was watching him do any of it. That was rather the point. For 30 years and more, across the pits of Wales, the yards of the Clyde, the mills of Lancashire, and the steelworks of Sheffield, British working men built an entire code out of nothing but discipline. No money required, no permission needed, no audience necessary. It cost nothing but attention, and it paid a man back in something the wage packet never could. The simple, private knowledge that he was exactly who he claimed to be. That code is still out there. It isn't gone, it's only waiting for one man, on one ordinary morning, to black his boots the night before, tip his hat at the right moment, and stand a little straighter for no one but himself. It could be you. If this code means something to you, subscribe and carry it forward, because the men who lived it are running out of mornings to be remembered by. And someone has to keep the standard standard.